So countries across Europe are tentatively working towards reopening their beaches and their tourism industries more widely. Indeed, only last week the European Commission announced it would be pushing for a reopening of the internal borders of the European Union to help the tourism sector this summer. Well, for more on this, we can speak now with Jeff Poole, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the World Travel and Tourism Council. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24. Could you please start by giving us an idea of just how badly European tourism has been affected by this pandemic?
Well, in short, the industry has been devastated. It's important to understand that travel and tourism provides 330 million jobs around the world and 10.3% of GDP. It's been the hardest hit sector, industry, but by definition, if we can restart tourism quickly, it will be the vital catalyst for the global economy. But we've seen huge job losses across Europe and across the rest of the world that we now need to recover.
Now, there is, of course, a lot of anxiety around this push to reopen tourist attractions, beaches. What is your take on this gradual return to normality? Are countries broadly doing it right?
Well, we've seen a mixed bag of good measures and bad measures. But what WTTC has done on behalf of the private sector is to launch a series of new safe travel protocols, which will give travellers assurances that they can be safe, because the guidelines are based on the World Health Organization and Centre for Disease Control guidelines. But we're also wanting to ensure that we have a coordinated approach across governments. It's really important that we don't see isolated and fragmented policies coming in that cause confusion to travellers and cause confusion to the travel businesses. So we applaud the recent moves of the European Commission to pull together a coordinated approach for reopening tourism as quickly as the safety factors allow.
And how likely do you think it is that individual countries decide to take that joined-up thinking approach?
Well, many of them are not doing that at the moment. Many of them are taking individual actions, which is why we're working with the European Commission, working with governments around Europe to try to get this joined up thinking. Our experience of previous crises, whether they've been disease-related or economic, is that the recovery is much faster if the private sector is involved with governments and if governments cooperate together. So given the importance of travel and tourism to the European economy, it's quite fundamental that the European governments talk to each other and don't introduce isolated measures, for example, like 14-day quarantine periods.
Now, here in France, we have been told that domestic travel will be allowed from July. No word really as to what that means for tourists from abroad. That could, needless to say, be devastating for the French tourism sector.
Yes, indeed. But we do recognise that there has to be a gradual restart to travel and tourism. And I think around the world we can see that people are expecting domestic travel and drive-to destinations to open up first, then perhaps regional travel within a region. But it's probably going to be towards the end of this year before we see intercontinental travel and tourism again. In some senses, though, that's helpful because we can, by dealing with domestic travel, we can improve on the protocols and the best practices we have now to protect people and enable travel and tourism to open up globally.
Jeff Poole, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the World Travel and Tourism Council, thank you very much indeed.